Sherlock Holmes and the Mystery of the Soul Hunter. Chapter 1. The Man in the Night. London was in the grip of its coldest winter nights. The darkness descended upon the city like a thick, heavy curtain, blending with the howling winds that swept through the narrow streets. Gas lamps cast a dim, flickering glow upon the cobbled roads, stretching the elongated shadows of those who trudged silently through the mist. Inside 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat by the fireplace, a pipe in one hand and a book on behavioral analysis in the other. Opposite him, Dr. Watson was engrossed in writing his notes on a recent case. A sudden, urgent knock on the door shattered the quiet. Watson put down his pen, glancing at Holmes. Without a word, Holmes had already risen and moved toward the door. A man stood at the threshold, wrapped in a thick cloak, his hood drawn tightly over his head. His face was pale, his breath ragged as if he had run a long distance. His frightened eyes darted between Holmes and Watson before he whispered, "Please, I need help. I don't have much time." Holmes stepped aside, gesturing for the man to enter. Watson swiftly shut the door behind them, blocking out the chilling wind. "Sit down," Holmes said, pointing to a chair across from him. "Who are you?" The man trembled as he pulled back his hood, revealing a gaunt face, with deep-set eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "My name is Elliot Faraday. I am a neuroscientist." Holmes studied him for a moment before asking, "What has driven a scientist to such terror that he flees to my door in the middle of the night?" Faraday swallowed hard, his fingers twisting together. "I am being hunted." Watson frowned. "Hunted? You mean someone is trying to kill you?" Faraday shook his head, his voice quivering. "No, I don't know who, or rather, I don't know what it is." Holmes raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest appearing in his sharp gaze. "Go on." Faraday took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "The people around me, they're disappearing. One every week. No traces, no clues, no sounds. They just vanish, as if they never existed." Watson glanced at Holmes, but Holmes remained silent, his piercing eyes fixed on their guest. "Can you explain further?" Faraday nodded, his hands clutching the edges of his coat. "The first was my assistant, James Whitmore. He disappeared from the laboratory in broad daylight. No one saw him leave, yet he was never seen again. Then it was Professor Hardwick, my mentor. After that, my housemaid, Mary, and then my best friend, Lawrence. They all vanished without a trace." "And what do you have in common with them?" Holmes asked. Faraday shivered. "I don't know, except for one strange thing." Holmes gave a small nod, signaling him to continue. "After each disappearance, I receive a letter. It's always left at my doorstep in the morning. It contains only one line. Remember 3 a.m. A heavy silence filled the room. Watson furrowed his brows, while Holmes remained expressionless, though Watson knew he was analyzing every word of Faraday's story. "Do you have any enemies?" Watson asked. Faraday shook his head. "No, not that I know of. I am a scientist, not a politician or businessman. I have no conflicts with anyone." Holmes rested his elbow on the chair's armrest, tilting his head slightly. "Then we must find out who is watching you." Faraday's eyes widened. "You believe me?" A faint smirk appeared on Holmes's lips. "I believe in verifiable facts. And your case presents too many intriguing mysteries to ignore." He stood up, walked toward the window, and pulled back the curtain. The dense fog swirled outside, barely illuminated by the dim street lamps. "You said the letters were always placed at your doorstep in the morning?" "Yes." "Were they sent by post?" "No. No stamps. No sender's address." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the empty street. A gust of wind rattled the curtains, making the flames in the fireplace flicker. Then, he turned back to them, his voice firm. "We need to go to your house. Now." Faraday stiffened. "Now? But," Holmes cut him off with a sharp look. "If you are truly being watched, then no one knows what will happen when the clock strikes 3 a.m. And I do not intend to wait in the dark to find out." Faraday swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. Watson grabbed his coat, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. Outside, London lay in a silent slumber, blanketed by thick fog, but none of them knew that somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes were watching their every move. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Disappearances. 1. A vanishing without a trace. The pale sun of London struggled to rise behind the thick morning fog. casting a dim golden hue over the cobblestone streets. The air was freezing, sharp like a blade against the skin, but it did little to slow the determined strides of Holmes, Watson, and Elliot Faraday. After their conversation the night before, Holmes had wasted no time in launching an immediate investigation. The disappearances all occurred precisely at 3 a.m., an hour too specific to be mere coincidence. Their first destination was the residences of Faraday's two missing acquaintances, Dr. Adrian Keller, a psychologist, Charles Morton, a mechanical engineer. Both were respected figures in the academic world, with no ties to crime or personal feuds that might explain their sudden vanishing. 2. Faint traces at the psychiatrist's office. Their first stop was Dr. Keller's office, a 3-story townhouse in Marylebone, sealed off by the police. With a swift and practiced motion, Holmes deftly unlocked the door with his tools. The interior was untouched, with no sign of struggle or forced entry. A neatly arranged desk stood in the corner, with a teacup still half full but cold to the touch. Watson examined it and murmured, "He was here just before he vanished." Holmes nodded, his magnifying glass scanning the floor as his fingers traced the edge of the desk. No signs of a fight, no unusual footprints, a disappearance in a locked room. Faraday, standing nearby, spoke with a strained voice. "I spoke to him that night. He mentioned researching a strange dream, a dream shared by many of his patients." Watson frowned. "A dream?" Faraday nodded grimly. "A dream of a faceless man." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he methodically searched through the desk drawers. Finally, he found a crumpled sheet of paper, the ink smeared as if written in haste. Straightening it out, Holmes read the chilling message aloud. 3 a.m., he is coming. Faraday clenched his fists. Watson whispered, his voice low, "Who is coming?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he slipped the note into his pocket, then looked up at the grandfather clock hanging on the wall. The pendulum had stopped, at exactly 3 a.m. 3. The engineer's house of fear. Their next destination was Charles Morton's home. Unlike Dr. Keller's office, this place had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned, blueprints and papers shredded and scattered across the floor. But the most disturbing discovery was on the wooden wall. A message, clawed into the wood with fingernails. 3 a.m., help me. A chill ran down Watson's spine. Holmes ran a gloved finger over the carvings. The scratches are fresh. He tried to leave a message before he disappeared. Watson checked the windows, but they were still locked from the inside. No forced entry. That means either someone had a key or... He hesitated. Holmes finished his thought. Or he vanished in a way we cannot yet comprehend. They continued searching, until Holmes discovered a small wooden box hidden inside Morton's desk drawer. He lifted it carefully, brushing away a thin layer of dust from its surface. 4. The wooden box and the faceless man. Back at Faraday's laboratory, they placed the wooden box on a cluttered work table filled with research papers. As Holmes set the box down, Faraday suddenly inhaled sharply. His face turned pale. I have never seen this box before." Watson frowned, skeptical. "Are you sure? This is your own laboratory." Faraday nodded firmly, stepping back as though repelled by it. Holmes didn't hesitate. He unlocked the box. Inside was a single, aged photograph, its surface yellowed with time. Holmes lifted the photograph, examining it closely. It depicted a man clad in a long coat, standing in the shadows. But the most disturbing part was his face. Or rather, the complete absence of one. A blank, pale void. Beneath the photograph, in faded black ink, a single sentence was scrawled. "I will return." Faraday's hands trembled. What is this?" Watson felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. It could be an elaborate attempt to manipulate your mind. Or, Holmes placed the photograph on the table. His tone measured. Or we are dealing with something far more inexplicable. A heavy silence fell upon the room. Watson felt a strange sensation, like being watched, yet when he turned around, there was nothing, only the dim light casting long shadows against the walls. Holmes suddenly broke the silence. "Faraday, are you absolutely certain you have never seen this man before?" Faraday shook his head rapidly. But then, something changed. His expression went blank, his eyes losing focus as a sudden shiver coursed through him. Slowly, He lifted a hand to his temple, his voice trembling. "No, but I feel like I have met him somewhere before." Holmes and Watson exchanged glances. It was clear. Faraday's memory was being tampered with. Holmes's gaze sharpened. It's time we find out whether 3 a.m. is truly a coincidence, or something far more sinister. 5. The unanswered mystery. Faraday's breathing grew unsteady. "Holmes, if the others have already disappeared, then what about me? What if I vanish at 3 a.m. too?" Holmes was silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then, he said calmly, "I do not believe in ghosts. But I do believe in someone, or something, orchestrating this from the shadows." Watson pressed further. "You think someone is behind all of this?" Holmes did not respond immediately. Instead, he picked up the photograph of the faceless man once more, his keen eyes scanning every detail, searching for a missing clue. Finally, he spoke. "Perhaps we are not looking for a single person, but something that exists within the darkness itself." A deep chill settled in the room. Watson felt a shiver crawl down his spine. Faraday swallowed hard, his fingers clenching at his sleeves. And then, a sudden gust of cold air swept through the room, making the window curtains tremble ever so slightly. Holmes placed the photograph back on the table, his expression unreadable. "We will have our answers at exactly 3 a.m. Chapter 3. The Faceless Man. 1. The Shadow of London. Once again, night fell upon London, draping the city in a shroud of cold and desolation. Thick fog coiled around the streets, making the dim glow of the gas lamps flicker like watchful eyes in the darkness. Inside 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, gazing at the deserted street below. Beside him, Dr. Watson watched Elliot Faraday closely. The man sat hunched in the corner, hands gripping his knees, his face etched with tension. Moments ago, Mrs. Hudson had left, carrying the eerie photograph they had found inside the wooden box. Holmes had sent it to an expert, hoping to determine whether the image had been altered, or if it contained some hidden message. Then, a knock echoed through the room. All three men startled. Watson swiftly made his way to the door. Lying on the doorstep was a black envelope, unmarked by postage, with no trace of a messenger. Holmes bent down, picked it up, and ripped it open. Inside, written in a shaky hand, as if scrawled in complete darkness, was a single sentence. "Remember 3 a.m. This time, it's your turn." Faraday sprang to his feet, his face drained of color. No, this can't be happening. I don't want to disappear." Holmes studied him for a moment, then turned back to the note. The ink was still fresh. Someone had delivered it only moments ago. Looking up, he met Watson's gaze. "Tonight, we must watch Faraday closely." 2. The secret beneath the box. Holmes placed the note aside and returned his attention to the wooden box. Lifting it, he flipped it over, inspecting it under the light. A nearly imperceptible engraving caught his eye. He retrieved his magnifying glass and leaned in. Beneath the glow of the oil lamp, a cryptic symbol emerged. An eye, intricately carved, with a long, narrow pupil, like that of a reptile. Watson frowned. "A secret emblem? Does it mean anything?" Holmes traced the engraving with his finger. Deep in thought, it could be the insignia of an organization. Or, he looked up, his gaze sharp, part of a ritual tied to these disappearances. Faraday took a step back, fear creeping into his voice. "I have never seen this before, but somehow, I feel like it has always been there, lurking in my life." Watson studied him. Sweat glistened on Faraday's forehead. Holmes tapped lightly on the box. A hollow sound. There may be something hidden inside. Carefully, he used a small knife to pry open the bottom panel. A folded slip of paper slid out, landing on the table. Holmes picked it up and read aloud. 44A 3 o'clock. Watson muttered. 44A, could that be an address? Holmes nodded. And 3 a.m., it's not just the hour of disappearance. It must be the key to something much larger. 3. The waiting game. Night deepened. Inside Faraday's apartment, a heavy silence filled the air. Holmes, Watson, and Faraday stayed within its walls, awaiting the appointed hour. Holmes did not believe in supernatural forces, but he did believe in manipulation, a mind that orchestrated fear. A scheme so precise that it turned mere whispers into terror. The air in the room felt heavy. The clock hands inched closer. 3 a.m. Faraday stood near the window, his eyes darting anxiously. Watson kept a firm grip on his revolver, every muscle in his body tense. Holmes remained calm, seated in his chair, his eyes studying the shadows in every corner of the room. Tick, tock. Then, a knock at the door. No one moved. Watson's grip tightened on his revolver. Faraday held his breath, his fingers digging into the armrest of the chair. Holmes stood, moving toward the door. Click. The door opened. There was no one there. Only a shadow stretched across the floor, long, thin, resembling the outline of a tall man. But there was no one standing there to cast it. A cold chill ran down Watson's spine. Holmes took a step forward. But before he could investigate, a gust of freezing air swept through the room, and Faraday screamed. They spun around. Faraday collapsed to the floor, clutching his head, his eyes wide with horror. Watson rushed to his side. "Elliot, what's happening?" Faraday trembled violently, his voice a broken whisper. I saw him. I saw the faceless man." The faceless man. Watson helped Faraday into a chair, but the man's hands continued to tremble, his face pale as death. Holmes shut the door and scanned the room. Nothing had changed, no signs of an intruder. "What did you see?" Holmes asked, his voice calm but commanding. Faraday gasped for air, eyes darting frantically before he whispered, I don't know. A shadow, a figure. Tall and thin, wearing a black coat, but his face, he had no face. Just a blank, empty void. Watson stole a glance at Holmes. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Perhaps it was just an illusion, stress-induced hallucination? Holmes folded his arms, thinking. No, he saw something. Whether real or a construct of the mind. It holds meaning. Faraday had not stopped trembling. Holmes walked over to the wooden box once more, studying the engraved eye on its underside. This is not just a warning. This is a mark, a sign of something larger. Watson exhaled sharply. You think it's a ritual? Or some form of coded message? Holmes did not respond immediately. He set the box down and turned his gaze toward Faraday. Tell me everything you remember, about the photograph, the box, and your missing colleagues, even the smallest detail. Faraday hesitated, swallowing hard. I don't remember ever owning this box. But the moment I saw it, I felt as if I had known it my entire life. As if it had always been there, hiding in the edges of my memory. Holmes nodded slightly. We are not simply investigating disappearances. We are unraveling something more insidious, perhaps an experiment, a psychological manipulation, or an elaborate scheme designed to alter perception. Watson's expression darkened. So what's our next move? Holmes lifted the wooden box once more, his fingers tracing the carved eye. We find the one who sent the letters. And more importantly, he placed the box down, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. We find the faceless man. Outside the window, the fog thickened, cloaking London in a deeper darkness. Yet somewhere, hidden within the mist, unseen eyes watched them still. Chapter 4. The knock at 3 a.m. London, 2:58 a.m. Inside Elliot Faraday's house, the air was heavy, dense, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The room was shrouded in darkness. Holmes and Watson concealed themselves in the shadows, eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for whatever was about to happen. Elliot Faraday sat in a chair near the fireplace, his breathing labored, hands gripping the armrests tightly. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He knew tonight could be his last. Holmes stood near the window, his sharp eyes scanning the deserted streets below. Watson remained by Faraday's side, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip. A cold wind whispered through the gaps in the window frame, stirring the thin curtains. 2:59 a.m. Outside, the street lay in absolute silence. No footsteps, no movement, no sign of anyone watching. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound was soft, yet chilling, like an invisible hand tapping against the door. Faraday stiffened, his breath caught in his throat, his eyes wide with terror. Holmes immediately signaled Watson to stay put. Moving silently, he glided toward the door, pressing his ear against the wood. No footsteps, no rustling of fabric, nothing but the sound of the wind outside. Then, the knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. Watson felt his heartbeat quicken. He tightened his grip on his gun. Muscles coiled. Holmes took a deep breath, then slowly reached for the doorknob. Click. The door creaked open. No one was there. Beyond the threshold, the fog stretched endlessly, swirling over the cobbled street. But then, something lay on the ground. A black envelope. Holmes bent down, picked it up, and carefully tore it open. Inside was a single line, written in bold, inky strokes. "Now, it's your turn." Holmes remained expressionless, but Watson felt a chill crawl up his spine. "No one outside?" Watson asked, his voice low. Holmes shut the door. He turned toward Faraday, but Faraday was gone. The chair was empty. Watson spun around, eyes sweeping the room. "Faraday? Faraday?" No response. Holmes moved swiftly, examining the floor, the windows. There were no signs of struggle. No sign of how or when he had vanished. But Elliot Faraday had disappeared. 1. The empty room. Watson rushed to the window. It was still locked. Impossible. He was just here seconds ago. Holmes stepped toward the chair, brushing his fingers over the armrests. They were still warm. That meant Faraday had disappeared in an instant, without a sound. Without leaving a trace. Holmes circled the room, eyes scanning every inch. He crouched low, studying the floor, fingers tracing over the wooden panels. Then, his eyes stopped. A faint trail of footprints. They led from Faraday's chair, toward the window. But they stopped there. There were no footprints leading away. Watson's face tensed. Did he vanish into thin air? Holmes clenched the letter in his hand, his gaze darkening. No, someone took him, by means we do not yet understand. 2. The cryptic mark. Holmes turned his attention back to the black envelope. Flipping it over, he found a symbol on the back, one he had seen before. The grotesque, reptilian eye, the same one carved into the wooden box. Holmes muttered under his breath. There it is again. Watson looked at Holmes, unease creeping into his voice. Holmes, if Faraday was taken right in front of us, inside a locked room, that means, Holmes finished for him. We are dealing with someone who operates beyond conventional means. Watson's grip on his gun tightened. You don't actually think this is supernatural, do you? Holmes remained silent, staring at the letter, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the paper. If this were an ordinary case, we would find an ordinary explanation. And if not? Holmes narrowed his eyes. Then we must reconsider what we accept as reality. Watson exhaled slowly. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets, the fog thickening, like a shroud concealing something that was watching them. 3. The window's secret. Holmes returned to the window. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the wooden frame, and paused. A streak of dust had been wiped away. Someone had touched it recently. Holmes threw the window open. But there was nothing outside, just the empty, fog-laden street. Then he looked downward, and that's when he saw it. A single drop of black ink. Or was it ink? Watson, hand me a chemical vial. Watson quickly retrieved a small bottle from his medical bag, filled with a solution Holmes often used for forensic testing. Holmes dripped a small amount onto the dark stain. Immediately, the substance changed color, from black to a deep, arterial red. Watson stiffened. This isn't ink. Holmes nodded grimly. No, it's blood, altered through chemical means. They locked eyes. Faraday had vanished before them. A mysterious substance was left behind. A cryptic symbol was marked on the letter. And somewhere in the shadows of London, an unseen force was still watching, waiting for the next moment to strike. Holmes straightened, his gaze like steel. We must find Faraday, before 3 a.m. tomorrow claims another victim. Chapter 5. The hidden mark on the photograph. Faraday had vanished. The room was engulfed in a suffocating silence. Holmes and Watson stood frozen, their eyes scanning every corner of the cramped space. Everything remained untouched, no struggle, no unusual noises, no signs that he had left through the door or the window. Watson felt a shiver run down his spine. He turned abruptly, staring at the spot where Faraday had just been sitting. Holmes, he disappeared inside a locked room. Could this be supernatural? Holmes did not answer immediately. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, his mind working at a furious speed. A disappearance without a trace. A sealed room. A letter of warning, arriving just before Faraday vanished. Holmes did not believe in the supernatural. But he did believe in brilliant minds, those capable of orchestrating events so meticulously that they seemed beyond human understanding. His eyes swept across the room once more. There was something here they had yet to see. 1. The hidden clue. Holmes's gaze landed on the wooden desk, where the old photograph still lay. He stepped forward, picked it up, and examined it closely. The faceless figure in the image was deliberately obscured, as if someone had intentionally erased his features. Holmes retrieved his magnifying glass, focusing on the inscription below the image. "I will return." Watson, standing beside him, watched his every move. "You think this photograph is connected to Faraday's disappearance?" Holmes didn't respond immediately. His brows furrowed as he noticed something peculiar on the photograph's surface. "We need to test something." From his coat pocket, he produced a small vial, a special chemical solution designed to reveal invisible ink. Watson observed as Holmes carefully dripped a single drop onto the inscription. For a moment, nothing happened, but then, slowly, faint letters emerged beneath the original text. The old inscription blurred and shifted, revealing a hidden message. 44A Whitechapel. 2. The Whitechapel Mystery. Watson murmured. "Whitechapel? Isn't that the place notorious for gruesome murders? Where Jack the Ripper once spread terror?" Holmes nodded, his expression sharp. "Precisely. But the real question is, why was this address concealed beneath invisible ink?" Watson crossed his arms, deep in thought. Could that be where Faraday was taken? Holmes considered this. Possibly. But if that's the case, then there are only two possibilities. Either the one behind this wants us to find that location. His voice darkened. Or we are walking straight into a carefully laid trap. A cold unease settled over Watson. "Are you sure you want to go there now?" Holmes set the photograph back on the desk and nodded. "We have no choice. If Faraday is still alive, we may only have a few hours left." 3. A long night in Whitechapel. London, 2:30 a.m. Holmes and Watson stood before a decaying building on Whitechapel Street. 44A. The structure appeared abandoned, its windows sealed with rotting wooden planks. Yet, it did not seem completely deserted. Holmes stepped closer, inspecting the lock on the front door. Recently replaced. Watson withdrew his revolver from his coat pocket. "Are you certain about this, Holmes?" A faint smirk appeared on Holmes's lips. "We've come this far. It would be a shame to leave without uncovering what lies inside." Producing his lock-picking tools, he worked swiftly. Within moments, the lock clicked open. As the door creaked ajar, a musty stench of damp and decay filled the air. Holmes entered first, with Watson close behind. The darkness inside was thick, interrupted only by a faint glow from the gas lamps outside. 4. Signs in the shadows. Holmes switched on his lantern, illuminating the walls. This place had been used recently, though dust covered the surfaces. Footprints, faint but visible, marked the wooden floor. Watson whispered, "If Faraday was brought here, he could still be inside." Holmes nodded, motioning for Watson to remain vigilant. They proceeded deeper into the building, until they found a door at the end of a long hallway. On the door, something made them stop cold. A symbol, painted in a deep, crimson red, a grotesque, reptilian eye, the same mark they had seen on the wooden box. Watson stiffened. "Holmes, I don't like this." Holmes examined the symbol carefully, running his fingers over the dried paint. "Whether we like it or not, we must continue." He reached for the doorknob and felt warmth. Someone had touched it recently. 5. The final warning. Holmes pushed the door open. Inside, the room was nearly empty, except for a single chair placed in the center, and a massive mirror covering the far wall. But the most unsettling thing, a message was scrawled across the mirror. "Too late. He is here." Watson gripped his revolver tighter. "Who wrote this?" Holmes stepped closer to the mirror, eyes tracing every letter carefully. Then, he looked down. A small object lay at his feet. He knelt, picking it up. It was a pocket watch. Faraday's pocket watch. Watson stared at the watch in Holmes's hand. "He was here." Holmes's voice was low. "Not just here. He may still be very close." Then, a chilling gust of wind swept through the room. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud. Watson spun, raising his gun. The hallway outside was shrouded in darkness. But in the faintest light, a figure stood motionless. Tall, thin, clad in a black coat. His face was nothing. Just a blank, empty void. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "We've found him, Watson." Chapter 6. The House in Whitechapel. 2:45 a.m., Whitechapel, London. The London sky was swallowed by dense fog, the night air carrying a bitter chill through the deserted streets. Holmes and Watson stood before a crumbling house on Whitechapel Street, 44A. The address they had uncovered, hidden beneath layers of invisible ink on the eerie photograph. The three-story building loomed before them, its walls cracked with age, its windows boarded up. It bore no signs of life. Yet there was something unsettling, as if it was not entirely abandoned either. Holmes approached the front door, testing the doorknob, locked from the inside. "We won't be entering this way," he murmured. Watson nodded. Both men silently circled around to the back of the house. The rear entrance was also locked. But Holmes took out his lock-picking tools, and within 10 seconds, click, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, hollow void beyond. 1. The disturbing photographs. They stepped inside, Holmes's small lantern casting long shadows across the dust-laden floor. The place reeked of damp and decay. Though abandoned, something about it felt occupied. And then, Watson stiffened. His eyes swept over the walls. There were dozens of photographs, each one identical, just like the one they had found in Faraday's lab. A man, cloaked in black, his face completely erased. Watson whispered, "This isn't normal, Holmes. Someone has been collecting these images, but why?" Holmes stepped closer, raising his magnifying glass. Each photo was real, not painted, not a sketch, and they all had something else in common. Beneath each one, a line of handwritten text had been erased, as if someone wanted to conceal a message. Holmes reached out, gently brushing the torn edge of one photo. Then, a voice came from behind them. "You came here too?" Watson whirled around, hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. Holmes, however, remained perfectly still, his gaze sharp as he studied the figure emerging from the darkness. A gaunt man stepped forward, his face pale and haggard, eyes sunken with exhaustion. His long coat was tattered, and he carried an air of both fear and determination. "Who are you?" Holmes asked. The man hesitated for a moment before replying. "My name is Richard Lane. I'm an investigative journalist." 2. Richard Lane's warning. Watson glanced at Holmes. Neither of them had ever heard of this man before. Holmes's voice remained steady. "What are you doing here, Lane?" Lane let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "It seems you still don't understand how deep this goes." Holmes observed him carefully. Lane was afraid, but not of them. Something else. "Everyone who receives one of these photographs disappears," Lane said. "I've been investigating this for 3 years. Watson frowned. 3 years? But the disappearances only began recently, didn't they? Lane shook his head. "No, the ones you know about are just the tip of the iceberg. The first cases date back to 1891. Holmes's eyes darkened. "And what have you discovered?" Lane let out a weary sigh. "Not much. Only that every single victim vanished inside a locked room. No struggle, no evidence, nothing left behind, and always a photograph appearing beforehand." Watson's stomach tightened. It was exactly what had happened to Faraday. Holmes studied Lane carefully before asking, "Then tell me, do you know where Faraday is?" Lane hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, he replied, "If he received that letter at 3 a.m., then I'm afraid he's already been taken into the Black Void." Watson's blood ran cold. "The Black Void? What the devil are you talking about?" Lane glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone, or something, to be listening. "I don't know exactly what it is. But everyone who vanishes is pulled into something they can't escape. And this is more than just a kidnapping." Watson shuddered. "What do you mean?" Lane leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "They don't just disappear. They're erased from existence." 3. The mystery of the Black Void. A heavy silence settled over the room. Watson turned to Holmes, but Holmes's face remained unreadable. "Erased?" Holmes repeated. "Do you have proof?" Lane clenched his fists. "I once tracked a man, Malcolm Reeves, a psychologist. He received one of these photographs. Just like Faraday, I spoke to him the night before he disappeared. And then, just a day later." Lane swallowed hard. No one remembered him. Watson's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Lane turned to him, his eyes filled with a quiet horror. I mean, every record of his existence vanished. No one recalled ever meeting him, not his colleagues, not his family, not even the government. It was as if he had never lived at all. Watson stared at him. Holmes, however, remained silent, his mind racing. And you think the same will happen to Faraday? Lane nodded grimly. If he's already been taken, we don't have much time. Because if 72 hours pass, he locked eyes with Holmes. He'll be erased from this world forever. Watson gritted his teeth. Holmes exhaled slowly, removing his pipe. Then, in a calm, measured tone, he spoke. Then tell me, Lane, will you help us bring him back? Lane hesitated for only a moment before nodding. If there's still time. Outside, the fog seemed to thicken, coiling like a living thing, as if something unseen was moving closer. Chapter 7. The Horrifying Experiment. 2:15 a.m., inside the abandoned house. Whitechapel. The dim glow of a single oil lamp flickered over the aged, yellowed pages of a stack of documents Richard Lane had laid before Holmes and Watson. The papers were frayed, worn by time, some parts smudged with old ink stains. Holmes scanned the first few lines, his sharp eyes gleaming with intrigue. A secret experiment from 1872. He murmured. Watson leaned in, reading along with him. Lane spoke in a low voice. I found these in the archives of a long-deceased journalist. Most records of this experiment were erased by the authorities, but I managed to uncover a few remaining fragments. Holmes turned the page, and suddenly, his gaze stilled on a name. Dr. Alistair Crowe. Watson frowned. That name, it sounds familiar. Holmes nodded, his expression grave. Alistair Crowe was a scientist who studied altered states of consciousness and the void between life and death. I have heard of him before, but never found any clear records of his work. Lane added, that's because all official records of Crowe were erased. Watson's brows knitted together. Why? What were they trying to hide? Holmes flipped to the next page, revealing an old black and white photograph. A group of scientists in white coats stood around a hospital bed, where a frail man lay strapped down, his wrists and ankles bound in thick leather restraints. Beneath the photo, a caption read, Experiment number 13. Final stage of consciousness separation. Subject unresponsive to external stimuli. 3 a.m., November 4, 1872. Watson clenched his fists. Separation of consciousness? What were they doing to these people? Holmes flipped to the next page and read aloud. We have discovered a void between life and death. If triggered correctly, a soul can be separated from its body and trapped within another plane of existence. A chill crawled down Watson's spine. They were trapping souls? Holmes's fingers tapped lightly against the table, deep in thought, and this connects directly to the recent disappearances. Lane nodded. From what I've gathered, this experiment was conducted at Bethlehem Hospital, but it was abruptly shut down. No one ever spoke of it again. Holmes stood abruptly, reaching for his coat. Then we need to visit Bethlehem Hospital, tonight. 2. The Shadows of Bethlehem Hospital. 3:10 a.m., Bethlehem Hospital. Once known as Bedlam, Bethlehem Hospital had been London's most infamous asylum, a place of suffering, madness, and unspeakable horrors. Now, it stood abandoned for over 20 years, a crumbling ruin veiled in thick ivy and decay. Holmes, Watson, and Lane stood before its massive iron gates, the rusted sign above them barely legible. Bethlehem Royal Hospital. Watson clutched his revolver beneath his coat. I don't like this, Holmes. Holmes gave a faint smile. You never like places like this. Lane stepped forward, using a crowbar to pry the gate open. Creak. The old gate swung aside, revealing a dark corridor stretching deep into the hospital's remains. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing eerily through the empty halls. Holmes led the way, his lantern casting flickering shadows over peeling walls and rusted medical equipment. As they passed by long rows of decayed hospital beds, Watson murmured, I wonder how many souls were lost in this place. Holmes remained silent. He guided them toward the hospital's central wing, where the most dangerous experiments were likely conducted. They soon arrived at a large steel door. Carved into the surface was a symbol, the same grotesque eye they had seen on the wooden box. Lane whispered, this is where they conducted the experiment. Holmes pressed his hand against the door. It wasn't locked. 3. The forgotten laboratory. Holmes pushed the door open. The room inside was large, but every inch of it was coated in dust and cobwebs. At its center stood an old iron bed, the leather straps still intact, frozen in time. But in the corner of the room, something else caught their eyes. A desk, and on it, the handwritten notes of Dr. Alistair Crowe. Holmes quickly flipped through the pages. November 5, 1872. Subject 13 has been successfully separated from his body. His consciousness remains in the void, but there are irregularities. 3 a.m. He is trying to return. Impossible. He has returned, but he is no longer human. Watson felt his blood turn cold. Holmes's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the final sentence. Lane murmured, "He is no longer human." Then, a sound. Footsteps. Slow, dragging across the floor. All three men whipped around, staring toward the hallway. Watson instinctively raised his revolver. Holmes held up a hand, signaling for silence. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but in the dim glow of the lantern, a figure appeared. Tall, thin, cloaked in black. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "We are no longer dealing with an ordinary case. Watson." Watson's breath hitched. "Holmes, is that?" The figure halted just outside the door. The room felt deathly silent. Then, it raised its head. Its face was nothing. Only a blank, pale void. Holmes's voice lowered to a whisper. "I believe we have just found the faceless man." Chapter 8. The Phantom in the Asylum. 3:25 a.m. Bethlehem Hospital. Holmes, Watson, and Richard Lane moved silently through the dark corridors of Bethlehem Hospital, once the most infamous asylum in London. A place where the most dangerous minds were locked away. The air was thick with decay, carrying the stench of rotting wood, stale disinfectant, and damp mold seeping from the crumbling walls. Everything was shrouded in darkness, save for the dim beam of Holmes's lantern, sweeping over sealed doors and endless, empty corridors. Outside, the wind whistled through broken windows, creating whispers in the night, as if the building itself was alive. Watson clutched his revolver tightly, his voice a hushed murmur. "Holmes, I have a very bad feeling about this." Holmes remained calm, his keen eyes scanning every inch of the corridor. "Fear has no place in an investigation. Watson, remember, everything has a logical explanation." Lane, trailing behind them, glanced around nervously. Every so often, his head jerked toward small, distant sounds, as if something unseen was moving just beyond their vision. "I hope you're right, Holmes, but if something is watching us, it was here long before we arrived." Holmes stopped abruptly. Before them stood a thick iron door, different from the others in the hospital. A faded government insignia was carved into the metal, rusted by time. Holmes tested the handle. Locked. Watson frowned. "Someone doesn't want us getting in." Holmes said nothing. From his coat, he retrieved his lock-picking tools, skillfully working the metal into the mechanism. Click. The door creaked open. Holmes stepped inside first. 1. The forgotten room. Unlike the rest of the hospital, this room wasn't covered in dust. Someone had been here recently. Holmes's lantern illuminated the space. A single hospital bed, still fitted with restraining straps, sat in the center of the room. Beside it, an old Eeg machine, its screen shattered, but its wires still intact. But what drew Holmes's attention was the leather-bound journal resting on a desk nearby. Holmes picked it up, turning to the first page. The words immediately sent a chill through Watson's spine. The experiment was a success. "We have discovered a way to separate the soul from the body." Watson clenched his fists. "Holmes, what exactly were they doing here?" Holmes didn't answer. He flipped through the pages, reading aloud. October 12, 1872. "We tested on 3 subjects today. All reacted violently when exposed to the machine. One of them stopped breathing immediately. But we recorded brain activity for more than 2 hours after death." November 3, 1872. "Subject 13 is our greatest success. When stimulated precisely at 3 a.m., we successfully pulled his soul from his body. But he wasn't just separated, he changed. He is no longer human." Holmes paused, his face shadowed in thought. Lane shuddered. This is what they did? A machine to rip souls from their bodies?" Watson exhaled sharply. Flipping through more pages, they created something else. Holmes turned to the final entry in the journal. The last sentence was chillingly brief. He is trying to return. 2. The faceless man. Then, a sound echoed from the corridor. Thud, thud. Watson spun toward the door. Gun raised. Holmes silently motioned for caution. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, dragging along the floor. Watson murmured, "We're not alone in here." Lane swallowed hard, his hand hovering over the small pistol at his waist. Holmes stepped to the door, peering through the narrow crack. At the end of the corridor, a tall figure stood motionless. Under the dim light, they could see it wore a long black coat. But the most horrifying detail, it had no face, just a smooth, empty void where features should have been. Watson felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest. Lane whispered, That's him, the man from the photographs." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "We need to find another way out. Now." 3. The chase through the darkness. Holmes scanned the room quickly. A secondary exit. A back hallway leading deeper into the hospital. "This way," Holmes ordered. All 3 men rushed out, their footsteps pounding against the floor. Behind them, thud, thud, thud. The faceless man followed. It moved without sound, but the shadows around it twisted unnaturally. Watson risked a glance back. The figure was gaining on them. They burst through another door, and into a large operating room. In the center of the space, a massive metal machine, tangled in wires and rusted cables. Holmes immediately recognized it. The machine from Crow's journal, the device designed to separate souls. But there was no time to investigate. Behind them, the door swung open. The faceless man stepped inside. Watson lifted his revolver, but Holmes raised a hand. "That won't work, Watson." The faceless man stood still. Then, it raised one hand, and pointed directly at Holmes. A gust of icy wind swept through the room. The lantern flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed everything. 4. The final warning. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Watson could feel the air shifting, as if the space around them was warping. Then, a voice. It came from nowhere, yet from everywhere. "You have gone too far." Holmes stood unmoving, his voice calm but firm. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, a whisper, one that sent a shudder through the very walls of the asylum. "I am the one who returned." The world tilted. The floor disappeared beneath them. And then, Holmes, Watson, and Lane fell into the abyss. Chapter 9. The Truth About 3 a.m. 3:40 a.m., Bethlehem Hospital. A chilling stillness filled the room. The ancient machine loomed in the darkness, its rusted wires and decayed control panels cloaked in cobwebs. Holmes, Watson, and Richard Lane had escaped the faceless man, but they knew their time was running out. Elliot Faraday was missing, and if what they had just uncovered was true, then he had less than 72 hours before he was completely erased from existence. Holmes flipped through the brittle pages of Aleister Crow's journal, scanning each line with sharp intensity. Watson, standing beside him, read aloud. "The human mind lingers in a fragile state between sleep and death, precisely at 3 a.m. Holmes's eyes narrowed. 3 a.m., so it's not just a random time. Watson continued. "If properly manipulated, the soul can be extracted and trapped within another plane of existence." A heavy silence settled over them. Lane swallowed hard and whispered, "That's why the bodies were never found. They weren't just taken, they were pulled out of this world entirely." Holmes set the journal down, his mind racing. If this is true, then we're not just investigating disappearances. We're dealing with a mechanism designed to manipulate the soul itself. Watson shook his head in disbelief. "Are you saying there's a way to extract a person's soul? And that it happens exactly at 3 a.m.? Holmes folded his arms, his piercing gaze scanning the room. "I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, Watson, but I do believe in science, especially science that has been twisted beyond its intended purpose." Watson glanced at the rusted machine before them. "But how?" Holmes turned another page in the journal, his eyes scanning rapidly. Then, he stopped, his gaze locked onto a critical passage. Watson pointed at it, reading aloud. "The only way to call a soul back is to trigger a powerful memory. But it must be done within 72 hours. After that, they will be erased forever." Lane inhaled sharply. "So that's our deadline. If we don't retrieve Faraday before the time runs out. Holmes lifted his gaze, his voice low and firm. He will never come back. 3 a.m., the most dangerous hour. Watson turned through the remaining pages. Crow's notes describe in great detail how the experiment worked. He believed the human mind could be manipulated through specific brainwave signals. Holmes nodded. That explains why the disappearances always occur at exactly 3 a.m. It's the moment when the human consciousness is at its weakest and most susceptible to external influence. Lane shivered. So if that's the case, the faceless man isn't a ghost. He's a being trapped between worlds. Holmes's eyes darkened, and it seems he has found a way to infect others with his state of existence. Watson clenched his fists. Holmes, we have only 72 hours. If we don't find a way to pull Faraday back, then not just him, but everyone who has ever vanished, will be lost forever. Holmes's gaze lingered on the old machine, his mind calculating every possibility. There is a way to bring them back, but we need to find the link that binds their souls to the real world. 2. Memory, the key to returning. Holmes tapped on a specific passage in the journal. Crow mentions a critical factor, triggering a strong memory. Watson frowned. What do you mean? Holmes spoke deliberately. The souls of the missing aren't completely gone. They're just stuck, and the only way to pull them back is to awaken their most powerful memories. Lane nodded slowly, realization dawning. If that's true, then we need something that holds deep meaning for Faraday. Something that can anchor him back to this world. Watson sighed. We don't know much about his personal life. But if there's anything significant to him. Holmes's eyes suddenly lit up with understanding. He reached down and grabbed the wooden box they had found in Faraday's laboratory. Opening it, he retrieved a folded letter. Watson frowned. What is that? Holmes unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words. Elliot, you have always been the brother I looked up to. Protect yourself. Don't let fear control your mind. Always remember, your family is waiting for you to come home. Holmes shut the letter, his voice firm. This is it. This could be Faraday's strongest memory, his connection to the world he left behind. 3. A race against time. Holmes turned to Lane and Watson. We have no time to waste. If we don't act before the 72-hour mark, Faraday will be gone forever. Watson nodded. So what do we do? Holmes's mind worked quickly. We need to recreate the exact conditions of Crow's experiment, but in reverse. If 3 a.m. is the moment they are taken, then it must also be our best chance to bring them back. Lane's brow furrowed. And how do we do that? Holmes turned toward the old machine. We use this. Watson's eyes widened. You're planning to reactivate a machine that's been abandoned for over a century? Holmes smirked. It doesn't need to be fully operational, just enough to generate the necessary signal to awaken Faraday's mind. Lane nodded, determination in his eyes. Then what are we waiting for? Holmes placed Faraday's letter on the table, his voice steady. We only have one chance. At exactly 3 a.m. tomorrow night, we will call him back. Watson took a deep breath. And if we fail? Holmes met his gaze, unwavering. Then we lose him forever. Chapter 10. The Final Trap. 1. A race against time. 4:15 a.m. Faraday's house. Holmes, Watson, and Richard Lane moved swiftly into Faraday's house. The darkness remained untouched, every object exactly as it had been when they last stood here, except Faraday was no longer here. Time was slipping away. They had less than 24 hours to bring him back before he was erased from existence forever. Holmes wasted no time. He immediately began searching every drawer, bookshelf, and desk compartment, his sharp eyes scanning for something, anything, that could serve as a powerful anchor to Faraday's mind. We need something deeply meaningful to him, Holmes muttered, sifting through stacks of papers. Watson frowned. Isn't his brother's letter enough? Holmes shook his head. It might be effective, but we need something even stronger. A memory profound enough to pull Faraday back from the void. Lane suddenly stopped in front of a small wooden box on the desk. What about this? Holmes stepped over quickly, opening the lid. Inside, there was a folded letter. Its elegant, delicate handwriting immediately catching his attention. Watson picked it up, reading the first line aloud. My dearest Elliot, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. He blinked, scanning further. Live on, for yourself. For us. For the love we once shared. Remember, no matter where you are, I am always with you." Watson stopped reading. "This is a letter from his wife." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Then this is the key." Watson looked at him. "Are you certain?" Holmes nodded. "There is no memory stronger than love and loss. If anything can pull him back, it's this." 2. Returning to Bethlehem Hospital. 2:50 a.m. Bethlehem Hospital. Holmes, Watson, and Lane returned to the abandoned asylum. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and the wind howled through the broken windows like distant whispers. Moving quickly through the dark corridors, they made their way into Alistair Crow's old laboratory, where the soul-separating machine still stood. Holmes placed Faraday's wife's letter in front of the ancient Eeg machine, his fingers running over the dusty control panel. Watson gripped his revolver tightly, scanning the shadows surrounding them. "Holmes, are you sure we know what we're doing?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was focused, ensuring the machine was at least functional enough to emit the necessary signal. "No, but this is our only chance." Lane glanced at his watch. 2:59 a.m. "We're almost at the critical moment." Holmes took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the main switch. "Let's begin." 3. The door between two worlds. Holmes activated the machine. A piercing hum filled the air as the ancient electrodes began to vibrate, sending invisible waves through the room. The space around them seemed to distort. The walls trembled, as if the entire hospital was shifting. Watson instinctively took a step back, eyes wide. "Holmes, something isn't right." Holmes said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the letter, which had begun to tremble, as if some unseen force was trying to pull it away. Then, a scream shattered the silence. Holmes spun around. At the center of the room, a shadowy figure began to form. Watson held his breath. Lane staggered back, his face pale. Elliot Faraday was appearing. 4. Returning from the void. Faraday's body was still translucent, hovering between dimensions. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion. "Holmes, Watson, where am I?" His voice wavered, fragmented. Holmes stepped closer, his voice steady. "You are standing between life and death. Faraday, you must return, now." Faraday looked down at his fading hands, shaking his head. I can't." Watson snatched the letter from the table, his voice strong and urgent. "Elliot, listen to me. This letter, it's from your wife." Faraday's eyes snapped toward him. The room shuddered, the air thickening. Watson read aloud. "My dearest Elliot, if you are reading this, it means I am gone." Faraday froze. The machine pulsed, the distortions around them intensifying. Watson pressed on. "Live on, for yourself. For us. For the love we once shared." Faraday staggered, his breathing uneven. Holmes's voice cut through the noise. "This is your tether, Faraday. This is what binds you to the real world." Watson continued. "Remember, no matter where you are, I am always with you." Faraday's form began to solidify. Lane gasped. "It's working." Holmes held his breath, his eyes locked onto Faraday. "Fight it, Faraday. Come back to us." Faraday's entire body convulsed. A bright light burst through the room. And then, Faraday collapsed onto the floor. 5. Life or death. Faraday lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Watson rushed to him, checking his pulse. A moment later, he exhaled. "He's alive." Faraday's eyes fluttered open, filled with overwhelming confusion and fear. What just happened?" Holmes took a step back, finally allowing himself to breathe. "You just came back from the dead, Faraday." Lane looked around, still on edge. "But where is the faceless man?" At that moment, a cold wind swept through the room. They all turned toward the machine. The faceless man was gone. Holmes's gaze drifted to the letter on the table. A faint, ghostly handprint was now imprinted on it. Holmes's voice was quiet, but heavy with meaning. "He's still out there, but for now, we've brought one soul back." Watson helped Faraday to his feet. The room fell silent once more. But each of them knew, this was not the end. Chapter 11. Return or Vanish. 3:05 a.m. Bethlehem Hospital. The air twisted around them, as if the entire room was being warped by an unseen force. Elliot Faraday shuddered, his form flickering, a mere shadow caught between two worlds. Holmes did not hesitate. He grabbed Faraday's wife's letter, his eyes scanning the words before reading them aloud. Voice unwavering. My dearest Elliot, if you are reading this, it means I am gone." Faraday froze, his body trembling violently. Holmes continued, his voice growing stronger. "Live on, for yourself. For us. For the love we once shared." Suddenly, the room shook violently, an icy wind sweeping through the space, scattering old documents and dust into the air. Watson tightened his grip on his revolver, knowing that no bullet could help them now. Lane held his breath, his wide eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Faraday clutched his head, screaming, "No, I can't." Holmes stepped closer, his voice sharp with urgency. "Faraday, listen to me. You are still alive. This is not where you belong." Faraday shook his head, his body slowly being pulled backward, toward the shifting void opening behind him. Watson shouted, "Holmes, we're losing him." Holmes acted immediately, grabbing Faraday's shoulders, anchoring him to the real world. Then, he read the final line of the letter. "No matter where you are, I am always with you." At that moment, a soft glow surrounded Faraday's form. The room quaked, as though two realities were colliding. Faraday let out one final scream, and then, his body collapsed onto the floor, trembling but whole. Between life and death, Watson dropped to his knees, immediately checking Faraday's pulse. For a few tense seconds, no one spoke. Then, Watson exhaled in relief. "He's alive." Faraday's eyes fluttered open, his pupils dilated, as though waking from a nightmare with no end. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Where was I?" Holmes gave a small, knowing smile, but his eyes remained sharp. "Between life and death, and now you've returned." Faraday glanced around the room, his face filled with confusion and unease. Lane stood motionless, staring at him as though struggling to believe he was truly back. Watson rested a reassuring hand on Faraday's shoulder, his tone gentle. "Do you remember what happened?" Faraday shuddered, his hands clenching into fists. "I remember the darkness, the whispers, and..." He hesitated. "I remember a man with no face." Holmes exchanged a look with Watson. "You saw him?" Faraday took a deep, unsteady breath, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Not just saw him, I was with him, too." The testimony of the returned. Holmes crossed his arms, his sharp gaze locked onto Faraday. "Tell us everything you remember." Faraday swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know how I left my body. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in this world." Watson's brow furrowed. "Then where were you?" Faraday's voice dropped to a haunted whisper. "A place without light, only endless darkness. And he was there, waiting for me." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "What did he say?" Faraday shook his head slowly. "He didn't need to speak. I could feel him. He wasn't just a ghost. Holmes, he was something trapped there for a long time." Lane's voice was tense as he asked, "How long?" Faraday lifted his gaze, his eyes hollow with fear. "He is subject 13. Watson inhaled sharply. Holmes's eyes darkened, his mind racing. "Subject 13, the only survivor of Aleister Crow's experiment." Faraday gave a slow, deliberate nod. "He is no longer human. But he never disappeared. He's been waiting for a way back. Free, the one who is coming." Outside the hospital, the wind howled violently, rattling the old doors as if something unseen was shaking them. Holmes turned toward the ancient machine, his expression unreadable. "So he was never gone, just waiting." Watson whispered, "He has been capturing the missing victims, but why?" Faraday looked up at Holmes, his voice filled with dread. "He is searching for someone strong enough to replace him." The room fell into absolute silence. Holmes immediately understood. He wants to escape the void, and he needs someone to take his place. Faraday shuddered. "And I was close, so close to being trapped forever." Watson clenched his fists, his voice tense. "So if we've pulled you back, that means he'll look for another victim." Lane's voice was low. "Then who will be next?" Holmes turned to the machine, then down at the letter, still bearing the ghostly imprint of an unseen hand. His voice was calm, but beneath it was something colder. Something knowing. "We've closed the door once. But if I'm right, tomorrow night, he will find another to replace him." Faraday clenched his fists. "And if he succeeds, no one will be able to stop him." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "Then we must act, before it's too late." Watson nodded, his face set with grim determination. "The only question is, Who will he choose? Outside, a fierce gust of wind slammed against the walls, rattling the door once more. Holmes stared down the darkened corridor, his sharp eyes searching the shadows beyond. The faceless man was not done, and the fight was far from over. Chapter 12. Hunting the Mastermind. 3:30 a.m., Bethlehem Hospital. Faraday had been pulled back into the real world, but Holmes was not satisfied. One question remained unanswered. Who sent the letters? Who was continuing Aleister Crow's experiment? Holmes scanned the old laboratory, the place where Subject 13 had once been trapped in the void between life and death. The records in Crow's journal had led them here, but one crucial piece was still missing. Holmes did not believe in coincidences. Someone had continued Crow's work, and that person was drawing in new victims, leading them to the same fate. His eyes swept across the pile of documents on Crow's desk. He flipped through each page carefully. Then, he found it, a list of names. 1. The erased names. The list contained about a dozen names. But what was truly disturbing was that most of them had been violently crossed out. Watson frowned, leaning in to get a better look. These names, who are they? Holmes read through them quickly. Most are patients, but some were Crow's associates. Lane raised an eyebrow. You mean other scientists? Holmes nodded. Yes, those who once worked with Crow on the experiment. But all of them have been crossed out. Watson narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Are they dead? Holmes remained silent for a moment, then turned to the last name on the list. The only name that had not been erased. M. Crow. Watson stiffened. Crow is still alive? Holmes gave a slow nod. 2. M. Crow, the heir to darkness. Watson shook his head in disbelief. That's impossible. Aleister Crow disappeared in 1873. If he were still alive, he'd be over 100 years old by now. Holmes' voice was low and firm. Not Aleister Crow. M. Crow. Lane whispered. Perhaps a descendant? Holmes nodded. Or someone who has taken up his work. Watson traced a finger over the name. M. Crow. What do we know about him? Holmes flipped through more notes and letters, searching for answers. Then, he found it, a handwritten note from Aleister Crow himself. M will continue my legacy. He has seen what I have seen. He will finish what I could not. Lane shuddered. It seems M. Crow is not just some follower. He was chosen to carry on Crow's experiment. Holmes crossed his arms. And if he is behind the recent disappearances? Watson completed his sentence. Then he is still out there. 3. The hunt for M. Crow. 4 a.m., Bethlehem Hospital. Holmes wasted no time. We need to find M. Crow immediately. Faraday, still weak, looked up, his voice filled with concern. But how do we know where he is? Holmes didn't answer right away. He continued searching through the remaining documents. Then, he found something, an old letter. Sealed with black wax. Holmes carefully opened it and read aloud. Come to where it all began. 3 a.m. I will be waiting. Watson frowned. So he wants us to find him? Holmes nodded, but his sharp eyes darkened. No, he doesn't just want us to find him. He has set a trap. 4. Where it all began. Holmes was not surprised when the only location that fit the description was Bethlehem Hospital itself. He is here. Watson gripped his gun tighter. Then are we walking into his hands? Holmes narrowed his eyes. If we do not stop him now, more victims will be taken. He will continue choosing new people to replace Subject 13. Faraday, still visibly shaken, nodded. Then, we end this tonight. 5. The hidden door. 4:30 a.m. A forgotten hallway in Bethlehem Hospital. Holmes, Watson, Lane, and Faraday ventured deeper into a section of the hospital they had never explored before. They moved through long, desolate hallways, until they finally stood before a large, sealed door. Carved into the wooden surface was a familiar symbol. The twisted eye, the same emblem they had seen on the wooden box and the letters. Watson turned to Holmes, his voice low. Inside, he's waiting. Holmes remained calm, but his gaze was sharp as a blade. Then it's time for answers. 6. Facing M. Crow. Holmes pushed open the door. The room was massive, like a secret underground laboratory hidden beneath the hospital. In the center of the room, a man stood waiting. He wore a long black coat, his silver hair reflecting the dim light. Yet his face was strangely young. When he saw Holmes, he smiled. I have been expecting you." Watson gripped his gun tighter. Crow. The man nodded slightly. "So, you have uncovered the truth. But, I'm afraid, you are too late." Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm and unwavering. "Who are you, Alistair Crow's heir?" Crow chuckled, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "No, I am Alistair Crow." The room fell into a deathly silence. Holmes showed no surprise, but his expression darkened. "What have you done?" Crow took a step closer, his voice low and commanding. "I have conquered death, and now, you will be the next to understand." Watson inhaled sharply, whispering, "Holmes, if he's telling the truth." Holmes gave a slight nod. "Then we are not facing a man. We are facing someone who has crossed the line between life and death." Crow smiled, a slow, chilling smile. He raised a hand, and the shadows in the room began to move. Chapter 13. The Final Invitation. 1. The Black Letter. 10 a.m. 221B Baker Street. The pale winter sunlight seeped through the window, casting long shadows across the room. But despite the morning's quietness, a tense atmosphere lingered inside 221B Baker Street. Dr. Watson sat in his armchair, sipping tea, yet his mind was still consumed by the events of the previous night. Crow, Alistair Crow himself, was alive. He was not just a mad scientist. He had found a way to transcend the boundaries between life and death. And now, he knew they had discovered his secret. A sudden knock on the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying a black envelope in her hands. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes glanced at it, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of interest passed through his sharp eyes. He took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, with only one line written, "Meet me at 3 a.m. 44A Whitechapel." Watson read the message, and a chill ran down his spine. He's inviting us into his trap? Holmes gently placed the letter on the table, a small smirk forming on his lips. "Not inviting, Watson. He's challenging us. 2. The final game." Watson frowned, skepticism in his voice. "Holmes, you're not seriously considering going, are you?" Holmes nodded, calmly rotating his pipe in his fingers. "Of course, I am, but this is clearly a trap." Holmes shrugged. "Every game is a trap, Watson. The difference is, we know exactly what we're walking into." Lane, who had been silent since the letter arrived, finally spoke up. "This may be our only chance to catch him. If Crow has survived for centuries without being discovered, the fact that he is revealing himself now means that he believes he will win." Faraday, still weak, nodded. "We have to stop this. If not, more people will be pulled into his nightmare." Watson sighed, but then stood up, determination in his eyes. "All right, Holmes, if you're going, then I won't let you go alone." Holmes smiled lightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Watson." 3. The Night of Reckoning. 2:45 a.m. 44A Whitechapel. London was drowned in thick fog. The cobbled streets of Whitechapel deserted. Only the dim gas lamps flickered like dying embers in the darkness. Holmes, Watson, Lane, and Faraday stood before the decayed house at 44A. It was the same house where they had found the photographs of the faceless man. But this time, the door was already open. Watson tightened his grip on his revolver. "I don't like this." Holmes stepped onto the creaking wooden steps, his eyes scanning the dark interior. "He wants us to walk inside," Lane whispered. "Then what are we waiting for?" Holmes smirked slightly, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. 4. A meeting with darkness. Inside the house, a long corridor stretched before them, lined with dimly flickering candles placed along the walls. Holmes led the way, Watson right beside him, gun drawn and ready. The air was thick and silent. The only sound was their footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. Then, at the end of the hallway, a voice emerged from the darkness. Deep, commanding, yet almost amused. "I knew you would come." Holmes lifted his head towards the figure standing at the corridor's end. Crow, or rather, Alistair Crow, was waiting for them. He looked exactly as he had the night before. Not a day older. His face was untouched by time, but his eyes held the weight of centuries. Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes calmly gestured for him to lower it. Holmes stepped forward, his voice even. "So, you wanted to see me?" Crow smiled, his gaze unreadable. Indeed, because you are the only one who understands me. Holmes folded his arms. Then tell me, Crow, what do you want? A duel of wits? A chance to boast about your so-called achievements? Crow's smile faded slightly, and his voice became lower, more serious. I want you to replace me. 5. Crow's offer. The room fell into a chilling silence. Watson's face twisted in shock. What is he talking about? Holmes? Holmes remained perfectly still, but his piercing gaze stayed locked on Crow. You believe that I will continue your work? Crow nodded slowly. You are brilliant, Holmes. You are the only one who has ever found me. Unraveled my secrets. You understand that death is not the end, it is a doorway. He took one slow step forward. I have opened that doorway, but I cannot step through completely. I need someone to replace me. Someone worthy. Holmes did not move, but his eyes flickered with deep contemplation. How did you survive? Crow's lips curled into a knowing smile. By keeping one half of my soul in this world, while the other half wanders the void. He tilted his head, studying Holmes. But I have been here too long. Holmes, I need another to take my place, someone brilliant. Someone capable. Watson clenched his fists, his voice tense. He's trying to lure you in. Holmes, don't listen to him. Holmes kept his gaze locked on Crow, his voice as sharp as a blade. And if I refuse? Crow's smile vanished. Then, I will be forced to find another. His gaze slowly swept across the room, landing on each of them. Lane swallowed hard. Faraday tensed in fear. Then Crow looked back at Holmes, and his next words sent a shiver through the air. And if I cannot have you, Holmes, I will take Watson. 6. The final move. Watson instantly raised his gun, but Crow simply smirked. Holmes remained perfectly still for a single second. Then, he smiled. A small, knowing smile. You have played this game well, Crow, but I'm afraid. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small vial. The liquid inside shimmered under the candlelight. Crow's eyes narrowed in suspicion. But it was too late. Holmes threw the vial to the ground. Boom! A thick white smoke exploded into the room, swallowing everything in a blinding haze. Watson shouted, "Run!" Holmes didn't hesitate. He grabbed Watson and Faraday, pulling them through the fog, out of the house. Behind them, Crow's laughter echoed through the smoke. But when Holmes turned back for one last glance, he was gone. Chapter 14. Confronting the Puppeteer. 1. Return to the abandoned house. 2:45 a.m. 44A Whitechapel. The streets of Whitechapel were shrouded in darkness, the gas lamps flickering feebly through the thick fog. Holmes, Watson, and Richard Lane stood before the decaying house, where M. Crow, the son of Alistair Crow, was waiting. Watson gripped his revolver tightly. Holmes, are you certain about this plan? Holmes did not turn back, his gaze fixed on the shadows beyond the door. Nothing is ever certain, Watson, but there is one thing I do know. With a steady hand, he pushed the door open. I've set my trap before he could set his. 2. A duel in the darkness. The house was just as they had left it, walls covered with eerie photographs of the faceless man. But this time, someone was waiting for them. A tall figure stood in the center of the room, clad in a long black coat. His dark hair and piercing gaze set him apart from Alistair Crow. Yet his presence radiated the same unsettling aura. M. Crow smirked as they entered. I have been expecting this moment. Sherlock Holmes. Holmes stepped forward, Watson and Lane flanking him closely. It is rare to see a man expose himself before completing his grand design. Crow chuckled, his voice low and haunting. Unlike my father, I do not need to hide. Because this time, I have perfected his experiment. Holmes narrowed his eyes. What do you want, Crow? Crow raised a hand, gesturing toward the eerie photographs that lined the room. Mankind is shackled by death. But my father discovered the means to break those chains. He took a step forward. I will create a permanent gateway, where souls can cross through and never return. Watson clenched his jaw. So that's your goal? To command the souls of the departed? Crow's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. Not just command them, Watson, I will make them obey. 3. Holmes' deception. Holmes crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. You are overconfident, Crow, but do you truly believe I came here unprepared? Crow smirked. You cannot stop me, Holmes. My machine is ready. He gestured behind him, where a door slowly creaked open, revealing a massive contraption, wires coiled like serpents, metallic plates humming with restrained energy. Holmes approached it, his sharp gaze analyzing every component. "So, this is the completed version of your father's work." Crow nodded. "Tonight, I will open the gateway, and you will be the first to witness its power." Holmes remained calm, but a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. "Then, by all means, begin." Crow hesitated, surprised by Holmes' quick agreement. He narrowed his eyes, but then turned toward the control panel and activated the machine. A deep vibration filled the room, the air rippling as though reality itself was being stretched. Watson leaned toward Holmes, whispering urgently, "Holmes, what are you doing?" Holmes merely smiled faintly. "Wait and watch, Watson." 4. The manipulated manipulator. The machine glowed ominously, dark mist seeping from its core, swirling toward a small rift forming in the air. Crow laughed, stepping closer. "Do you see, Holmes? I have achieved what my father could not." His hand reached toward the rift, as if preparing to claim the power for himself. But then, the machine trembled violently. Sparks crackled. Crow's smirk vanished. His eyes widened in confusion. What is happening?" Holmes' calm voice cut through the chaos. "Did you truly believe I would allow you to control it?" Crow staggered back, his body being dragged toward the vortex. Watson gasped. "Holmes, don't tell me you." Holmes gave a small nod. "I made some adjustments beforehand. Instead of opening a gateway for you to command, it will now pull in the one who activated it." Crow's face contorted in pure horror. "No, you can't." Boom! A howling void erupted from the machine. Tendrils of darkness coiling around Crow, dragging him toward the very rift he had created. He screamed, "Holmes, you cannot escape this forever. I will return." And then, he was gone. The machine fell silent. The rift sealed itself shut. 5. The end, or the beginning? A deep silence settled over the room. Watson exhaled shakily, scanning their surroundings. Is he truly gone?" Holmes nodded. "He has been swallowed by the very force he sought to wield. And this time, there is no one left to pull him back." Lane, still in shock, exhaled sharply. "So, it's over?" Holmes glanced at the machine, then pulled a small vial from his coat pocket. "Not quite yet." He poured the acidic solution onto the remaining control panels. The metal hissed and corroded instantly, the circuits burning out, rendering the device irreparable. Holmes watched for a moment, then turned away. "Now, it's over." 6. A final warning. As they stepped out into the London streets, the first rays of dawn peeked through the fog. Faraday, though still weak, looked more at peace than before. "Have we truly ended this, Holmes?" Holmes gazed into the distance, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, but what we've seen may only be a fragment of the truth." Watson turned to him. "You fear that Crow could return?" Holmes gave a small, knowing smile. "No, Watson, he is gone." He looked up at the sky, eyes sharp as ever. "But what worries me more is that someone else may try to open the gateway again." Together, they walked away, leaving the cursed house behind. But high above, on the rooftop, a shadow flickered, a presence unseen, watching, waiting. Then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. Chapter 15. The Enigma's End. 1. The darkness of London. The thick fog drifted lazily over the empty streets of London. The chimes of Big Ben echoed in the distance, striking 5 a.m., signaling the end of a long and haunting night. Holmes, Watson, and Richard Lane walked in silence, their footsteps the only sound disturbing the eerie calm. Behind them lay 44A Whitechapel, the place where M. Crow had been pulled into the eternal void. The cold air wrapped around them, but this time, there was no longer the feeling of being pursued, no unseen force lurking in the shadows. Everything was over. Or was it? 2. Holmes' contemplation. Holmes had not spoken a word since they left the house. Watson observed him closely. Usually, after solving a case, Holmes would display either quiet satisfaction or restless excitement, eager to move on to the next puzzle. But tonight, there was something different. Holmes seemed unsettled. Finally, Watson broke the silence. "Holmes, what are you thinking?" Holmes stopped walking. He turned his gaze toward the dark horizon, his expression unreadable. "We have won, Watson, but how many souls remain trapped?" His voice was low and thoughtful, missing its usual sharp edge. Watson knew exactly what he meant. Crow had been consumed by the void, but what about the others? Those who had vanished before, were they truly gone forever? Or were they still somewhere in between? For the first time in a long time, Sherlock Holmes had a question he could not answer. Watson placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "Holmes, we did everything we could. Sometimes, we cannot save everyone." Holmes remained silent for a long moment. Then, he gave a small nod, but his gaze never left the shadows ahead. "Perhaps you are right, Watson." And with that, he turned away, his silhouette blending into the early morning fog, like a phantom, forever haunting the city that never sleeps. 3. The final mystery. 7 a.m. 221B Baker Street. Holmes sat quietly by the window, watching the familiar view of Baker Street bathed in the pale morning light. The world had moved on, but inside his mind, the case was not yet closed. Watson entered, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. "Holmes, you should get some rest." Holmes did not turn away from the window. "Do you truly believe Crow has been destroyed, Watson?" Watson hesitated. I don't know, but the gateway is sealed. If he still exists, he cannot return." Holmes let out a quiet chuckle. "Cannot return? Are you certain?" Watson frowned, sensing something in Holmes' tone. Holmes reached for a small piece of paper on the table. "Do you recall the last letter we received?" Watson nodded. "The invitation from Crow?" Holmes turned the letter over and pointed to the bottom corner. Under the daylight, a faint message was revealed. A message that had not been there before. Watson's breath caught in his throat as he read the words. "This is not over, Sherlock Holmes." A chill ran down Watson's spine. Holmes smiled, but it was not a smile of triumph. He slowly placed the letter back onto the table and leaned into his chair. "So, the game is still not finished." 4. A question without an answer. Watson stared at the note, unable to tear his eyes away from the ominous words. But how? Crow was pulled into the void. How could he possibly have written this? Holmes did not respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out his pipe, lit it carefully, and inhaled deeply. Then, in a calm and measured tone, he spoke. Perhaps he was not fully consumed. Perhaps he found a way to remain. Watson clenched his fists. "Are you saying he could still come back?" Holmes did not nod, nor did he shake his head. He simply continued gazing out the window, watching the city wake from its slumber. "We closed the gate, Watson, but that does not mean it can never be opened again." Watson felt a weight settle in his chest. "Then, what do we do now?" Holmes stood up, his piercing gaze regaining its old sharpness. "We wait, we watch, and we prepare for when the time comes." Watson sighed and shook his head with a tired chuckle. "You never truly stop, do you, Holmes?" Holmes smirked lightly. "Darkness never truly disappears, Watson. It only retreats, waiting for the right moment to return." He stepped toward his bookshelf, reaching for Aleister Crow's journal. Watson peered over his shoulder. His heartbeat quickened when he saw the final words written in the journal. "We may close the door, but the door never truly disappears." Holmes snapped the book shut, his face unreadable. "And so, Watson, this is not truly the end." He turned away, his figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the morning sun. A shadow among shadows, forever chasing the mysteries lurking beneath the surface of London. For though the case was closed, the story was far from over.